Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the free-to-play review. So today's topic is going to be the latest iteration of the summon pool, specifically the Sylvan summon pool. But we're also going to be talking about the associated challenge tournament where you can, spoiler alert, get the air quotes free summon from. So let's dive right in. We've got the Sylvan summon pool to be expected because, of course, I do want to offer up a chance for the whales and krakens to buy their shot at Raya the Mourned, of course, the event dungeon boss, but also a new Void Legendary champion associated with the Web of Corruption event. But of course, alongside that, in terms of the headline champions, they're also offering up the faction unity guy for Kaldor, who's okay. I think she's a pretty decent champion. She's definitely a bit of a glass cannon, as we've can tell from the event dungeon. It's relatively easy to kill her, at least on the normal stages. The challenge stages were a different animal, but she's relatively squishy. But she does have the survivability passive if you pair her with a Veil champion. Or I guess she brings her own increased attack. So yeah, you need to bring block debuffs and Veil, and then she can't die, kind of like Cassandra's passive. So it's similar to that, but I think she can do some work in certain situations. But, Void Legendary, for us normies, she's probably not going to be in the cards. Aside from her, though, we do have a decent selection of some of the better legendaries in the Sylvan Watchers. Granted, the trend tends to be that the more newer factions have better champions just regardless, just because they're newer and they're more modern. So there's kind of a bit of a bias in that, compared to something like Bannerlords, which has a lot of legacy champions by contrast. But in this case, lots of good champions. Estrid, previous fusion, great for Hydra, great for Arena as a kind of a backup speed booster, speed lead champion. Really fast, really good for that. I run her personally in a cursed set for Hydra, super solid for that one. Gladecat of the Meltwater, another great Hydra champion, perfect Veil, increased defense, increased accuracy, increased attack, some extra turns in his kit, and bonus of an A1 on that can freeze, but you don't really use that, and in Hydra and other areas like that. What's his name? Baird, I think. Baird the Broad, one of the minions in the event dungeon, who's definitely kind of annoying, but I don't think he's that strong. But he does have this debuff spread, provoke pain link thing going on there, which is kind of interesting. King Galkabar, I actually just recently did a showcase on him. If you want to check that out, it will be up in the card in the upper right hand corner. But after his buff, he's definitely a pretty solid dragon champion, to say the least. So be sure to check out that video if that is of interest to you, to see what he can do nowadays. Quocha was meant to be the Armand's counter, but never really kind of got to see the light of day because, Stone Skin meta was a thing, Mercurial meta is still a thing now, and it just doesn't really work, unfortunately, to counter Armand's. And Armand's has kind of fallen a little bit by the wayside from the meta because of polymorph, wands of submission, etc. Of Autumnborn, honestly, there's no bad things to say about her. Maybe just the fact that she only has a single target revive, but she's a really, really solid champion. Great for Hydra, great for Chimera, great for faction, or is great for basically anywhere you can want to run her Ice Golem as well. Super solid healer, cleanser, reviver, and all of that spiel. Feral the Barkhorn, pretty solid, Hydra Chimera champion. Lots of good buffs with increased res and perfect Veil for trials, and then also good debuffs just to control. Also good for trials and Chimera, but also good for debuffing bosses. And then he has one of the strongest passives in the game for just raw damage, where you can increase your damage by 20% if you have 4 or more buffs on your team, not just provided by him, just on the team in general. So, and then and last we have Grand Oak Patrick here with the the best Fire Knight hard ally attack champion in the game, with decreased cooldown on the A1, the cleanse, and destroyed max HP, and then the ally attack here, course, with the increased speed. And then his passive gives you basically the buffs that you need on the right type of champion, which is a nice solid bonus. But yeah, my point is lots of great champions up for grabs in the summon pool. So if you don't have any of these, you're probably, maybe 75% of them are really, really solid and potentially game changing if you don't have them. So definitely consider going for the summon pool if you can. In terms of the epics, which of course is the most likely outcome, decent mix of good and bad here. You've got Mr. Rider Dahi, one of the best, or I guess, well, until Fallen came out, kind of the best debuffer in the faction, but you can argue between the two of them now. Got Pan the Bowhorn. I've heard he hits relatively hard. Haven't personally built him out, but I'm sure people are correct relative to his multipliers. Dudan the Runic, really solid taunt champion who can cleanse and counterattack, or puts counterattack on himself, which can synergize as well with his A1 that can cleanse. So he's partially cleanser, partially just a protector, partially aggro drawer. We've got Crowd in the blue, arguably the best Fire Knight hard epic in the entire game. Super solid champion. We got Ruella, really solid single target debuffer, good for Fire Knight in all variations. And then if you're still working towards Lady Mikage, there's a couple of Lady Mikage epics in here. We got Lockwane as well as End Moonbeam. So if you're looking still to claim your Mikage, you might be able to get one of those epics that you might need from this summon pool. As usual, it's going to cost you 40 fragments per summon, and the breakdown of the chances are 6% chance for a legendary, i.e. a sacred shard, and a 94% chance for an epic, which again, as I always like to say, means that the most likely outcome is that you're going to walk away with an epic if you're going for the one free summon. If you're buying more of them, or you have more of them, then you might have better luck to get a legendary. But at the bare minimum, most of the time, 19 out of 20 times, you're going to get an epic. So don't be surprised if that is your outcome. And in terms of how we get our free summon this time around, let's hop over to the tournament and kind of switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about the Sylvan Watchers Spider Tournament. So I talked about in my review of the Princely Titan event that we knew that there was going to be a special Spider Tournament coming down the pipeline. I thought it was going to be a little bit more expansive than this. I guess I should have known that the theme of the Web of Corruption is Sylvan Watchers, so it kind of makes sense. But I thought they were just going to expand it to the Norwegian Union. That way we'd have a little bit more options as far as dealing with Spider. But in this case, we are locked to the sole faction of the Sylvan Watchers, which is honestly quite tough. There is a very, very easy solution if you have her, but if you don't, like myself, then you kind of have to come up with some other things. But at least on the bright side, it is Spider, so you can, at the very least, you can just kind of brute force it and just kind of blitz through the lower levels, especially of normal mode. And the milestone that you need to get, at least for the Titan event points, is only at 825. So if that is your goal, you're going for the Princely Titan event, then you just need to do, not too much effort even on a low level. But if you are going for the air quotes free Prism Summon, which I am in my case, you can see I already have 800 points so far, then you have to get out to 1400. But in fairness, that's lower than it usually is for these types of tournaments. Usually it's up at like 1750. So once again, they made it a little bit easier to do, just because of, at least in my opinion, of how restrictive this one is in this case. So when it comes to Spider, this one's kind of an interesting one depending upon the champions you have at your disposal. I definitely don't recommend trying to do hard mode stage 10. That might be a little too difficult for majority of players, including myself. But if you're going with a kind of nuking strategy, then stage 1, 2, 3 up maybe through 6 are definitely viable, just because you can kind of brute force it and you get free damage on the boss by killing the minions. And so that is the team that I have to showcase for you today. Unfortunately, I can't build the ideal team. Like I mentioned, I don't have the perfect champion for this stage, but most people probably will drop back down into normal, and there's no shame in doing that, especially for a 2-day long tournament. And so if you were to do that, then the breakdown as far as the best stages to farm would be stage 25 gives you the best quality gear, stage 20 gives you the most efficient stage, i.e. points per energy spent, and then stage 16 is just a little bit easier. And you still have a chance to get 6-star gear. And again, you can kind of more so focus on just kind of blitzing through and killing the minions as much as possible, and then also doing damage to the boss in the meantime. So in my case, the best stage for me to farm is hard mode stage 3, and this is my team here. So pretty bare bones, but I'm using Mist Rider Dahi as one of our debuffers. I'm using Estrid as our other debuffer. She brings the weaken and a little bit of hex here and there, because like I mentioned earlier, she is in a curse set. We have Elva to keep the team running and alive just in case, and then I'm using Nice because I have Nice, but effectively this is just some AoE nuker who can try to kill these spiderlings and do damage that way. So let's go ahead and see this team in action. It's pretty straightforward. There's not much to talk about in terms of presets. Everyone basically does what they need to do for their role. I think, I delayed Elva's cleanse by 1 turn just to make sure that she cleanses after everyone else's first turn. But yeah, you can see there, big nuke from Mr. Rider Dahi and from Nice. And usually people would swap gear around, change gear. I don't like changing builds on my champions to deal with niche content like this, but ideally, of course, Mr. Rider Dahi would be faster than Nice. Just to make sure he gets decreased defense out there before we AoE on the minions. But at the same time, just because the spider, as we're going to see here, is going to reset anyways, it's not too important that first cycle as far as the damage we do, or as far as maximizing the efficiency, I should say, of the damage that we do, because we're just not going to do where she's going to heal a decent amount. But ideally, yes, the debuffer would be faster than your AoE DPS, just to make that a little bit more efficient. But as you can see here, it doesn't really matter all that much. This run takes, just over a minute or so, depending on RNG. And obviously, having a Nice does make this really fast, because he does have a solid AoE ability that can give him some turn meter, so he can kind of take back-to-back turns. In my case, he doesn't have enough accuracy to do that, but he could be built in that way. And then he does have the A3, which most people don't, you see it as a block revive in the arena most of the time, if at all, but it also has a special thing where I think it deals like twice as much damage to bosses or something, so that's why he's hitting pretty darn hard with that on the boss, 800,000, 600,000 or whatever. But obviously, yeah, so this could be, like I said, this could be just some AoE nuker that you have in the faction depending upon the affinity, but this is hard mode where you're more optimized around killing the spiderlings, because that does damage to the boss. And you can see here we don't have any other traditional forms of damage in terms of burns or poisons or any max HP. We're not doing any of that because I just don't have the champions for it, so we're just going old school brute force, but just doing a lower level of hard, just because I know I can survive and still get the job done. But this similar style of team is what you could run on stage 16 and lower, depending upon how much you want to invest in this tournament. So really quickly, let me talk through the builds on these champions, just in case you are curious of how they are structured. So we'll start off with Mr. Rider Dahi, who is luckily 5-star awakened, as well as plus or fully empowered, but that's not really that important. He's built more like a extra DPS, but not like a super carry DPS, so to speak. But yeah, he's just in like random, this is like Faction Wars, Curse City type gear. So Immortal, one piece of Supersonic, and then the speed set. So I wanted him relatively quick, but not like super fast, but just fast enough that he's faster than my nukers in that faction, most of the nukers. But yeah, 44,000 on the HP, 4,800 on the attack, 240 on the speed, full crit rate, 230 on the crit damage, and then 400 on the accuracy. I don't exactly know what you need for stage 3, because it's just kind of an arbitrary stage that you usually typically don't farm. But I set him up so that he's meant for, up and through hard mode dungeons and whatnot. So 350 plus was kind of the target there. So we ended at 400. I think he was 350 before empowerment and all that other stuff. So that's what pushed him over the edge. But yeah, that is his build. He, like I mentioned, he is a Faction War specific champion, so there's no relic on him. He is fully booked, of course, because he is an epic, and he does not have any masteries aside from a little bit of crit rate, a little bit of accuracy. Next up, we have my Elva Autumnborn, who is in one of my 2 9-piece protection sets on my entire account, and so that's super fun. Of course, that is great for Chimera, great for Hydra, great for all that stuff. I use her in both of those areas, and yeah, 9-piece protection, pretty straightforward. Obviously, more damage than just protecting your buffs, of course. HP 84,000, defense 4.5k, which the HP was a little bit higher, but that's just the nature of the stats that I have. 322 on the speed, so pretty darn quick, but a lot of that is the bonuses of the protection set itself. And then definitely high on the resistance, pushing 600, nearly a little bit, or no, she is 600. I just haven't maxed out the banner, waiting for the next gear enhancement, but she will be over 600 relatively soon. In terms of everything else, I do have a perched shadow on her. I do think that's arguably one of the best relics for these types of supports who are revivers or cleansers, who have a tendency to use their A1 in between revives because no one is dead. Therefore, you can get some extra turns here and there, and it's only 3 stars, so it's nothing crazy. She is fully booked, of course, very, very versatile with her books, and she's actually a weird champion where you technically have to book her to get a full chance to cleanse, which is odd. Usually it's just cooldowns on cleansing abilities, but this one, she can, if you don't book her, she technically might not remove your debuffs, which is really weird. But anyways, I digress. In terms of the blessing, I do have Nourish on her, so that her continuous heals are a little bit more potent, and they can also restore destroyed max HP. And then she is fully mastered, and these are the masteries here, so indexing more into the resistance and the healing side of the defense and support trees. Next up, we have my Estrid Dreamsong, which again, she is built specifically for Hydra in the Cursed set, the one piece of Merciless as well. And she has decent multipliers despite being a support champion. Obviously, her attack doesn't scale super well, but it scales well enough that she does an appreciable amount of damage in Hydra specifically, just, with multiple, or with her big AoE that she cycles through a lot. Also bringing the weekend, of course. But anyways, 55,000 on the HP, 4k-ish on the defense, or on the attack, 3k on the defense, 262 on the speed, full crit rate, a little bit of crit damage. She has crit rate gloves, so crit damage is going to be relatively low. And again, targeting that same level of accuracy, 350 plus, but the blusting from the 5-star pushed her from the 350 up to the 431. So it's a little bit overkill, but of course does the job. Little Journal of Necrotos on her, and a little bit of turn meter boosting from her turn meter boost. Obviously I could level this up a little bit higher, but I just kind of put the 1-star on her because you get plenty of journals as you start to progress with relic acquisition. She is fully booked. Once again, of course, that is imperative for her to cycle properly through her skills. And I'm rocking the 5-star brimstone on her, but you could definitely go with crushing rend or cruelty or anything like that. If you're running her in the arena, you could definitely go with intimidating presence instead. But like I said, mine is more PvE focused, and you can see the masteries kind of reflect that. So we have the pretty standard stuff here. Left hand side of the offense tree coming down to War Master, and then support tree, some of the healing stuff, and also the debuff amplification stuff with Master Hexer, etc. And then last but not least, we have my Nice the Shadow Thief, who's mostly optimized for arena, but he is in a Savage set, and definitely not my best Savage set. He's not my most used attack, or HP based rather, nuker, but he is kind of up there. I slot him in when it makes sense to do so. So total stats on him, I guess we could focus on Form 2 in terms of the total stats, but technically we're keeping him in Form 1 for the sake of this fight. But I think that's what more people are interested in typically is Form 2. But 100,000 HP, 2.7k on the defense, 261 on the speed, full crit rate, 248 on the crit damage. So again, nothing crazy. He's not awakened and empowered and all that fun stuff that makes him really, really broken, but he does a decent job, I will say. Relic, I do have one of my wands with submission on him, one of my higher level ones, level 15. And of course, wand of submission is wand of submission. Obviously protects you, or helps protect you from CC. We do have the Chainbreaker blessing on him so that he can kind of try and free himself if the wand fails me, which it usually does. And it's only 1-star again, but he's a mythical, so it's hard to upgrade those. He is fully booked on both forms, just because I've had enough time to farm the tomes for both forms, so that is a thing. But definitely, if you're focusing mostly on Form 2, then you really only need to book one of the forms. But if you use them in both, which I do, then booking both forms can make sense. And then for the masteries, pretty standard as far as nuking masteries for the arena. We're obviously coming down to Helm Smasher to ignore as much defense as possible. Cooldown reduction, cycle of violence, most of the damage amplification stuff. In the defense tree, we have a nice straight line all the way down. I didn't go for retribution, deterrence, and whatnot, because typically when you're in alt form, you have the counterattack that's protected anyway, so you don't really have to worry about that. So we're going for like as much turn meter stuff as possible, and then as much tankiness as possible as well, to make him harder to kill in Form 2. Now let's take a quick look through the faction and talk about some of the arguably better strategies that one could use. And as I hinted at earlier, the most obvious champion to use if you happen to have her, I do not yet, is Saoirse, because after her buff, I know a lot of people don't really care about her. In fact, the reviews are probably very, very low, and are definitively or understandably so, I would say. But nonetheless, she does happen to be perfect for this particular niche tournament with the contact-free AoE burn, or rather affinity-friendly AoE HP burn, that even if you don't book it, it doesn't have an effect on the cooldown, so there's always a 3-turn cooldown. And honestly, you could run her unbooked with the 80% chance to place the burn, which is good enough for stuff like this. You can just run her and eventually she'll kill the boss. But she has a nice synergy with her A1 where she can increase the duration of burns, which will typically go on the boss spider in terms of her attacks. And then she can also heal herself when HP burns are activated, so she can heal herself. But you probably do want to run her still in like a regen or immortal or something to keep her alive if you wanted to run some sort of solo strategy. And of course, you probably do want some resistance on her so that she doesn't take the poison damage. But the easiest thing you could do if you're running a Saoirse strategy and you're lucky enough to have her is to pair her with Crowd in the Blue, we talked about earlier from the summon pool. AoE freeze, controls the spiderlings, and then she does, and then she provides the burns, and then you have a standard tank and burn strategy when it comes to spider, which is always good to have and tried and true. When it comes to debuffers, if you wanted to go the more DPS route similar to what we did, then of course the most recent fusion, Folan, does have a decreased defense AoE effectively with the debuff spreading. Of course that could be resisted, so it might not happen all the time, but most of the time you're going to get that. And then of course Mr. Dahi, who we highlighted in my team with the AoE decreased defense. So those are your two debuffers. There doesn't really seem to be much turn meter control in this particular faction. Ruella has a little bit on her A1, but that's definitely not going to prevent the spider from taking a turn, even if you run her in Relentless and other stuff like that. And then just in general, in terms of these supports that can be helpful in this particular fight, we talked about Alva, healer, cleanser, reviver, etc. King Galkabar after the buff is again decent as far as providing some cleansing for the poison, some shielding, which can protect your team. And then, with his passive, he can activate poisons on the spiderlings who will be attacking your team. Glaikad, not necessarily the best for this, but he is a reviver, so in case you need to keep your team alive, he can definitely do that if you happen to have him. Estrid we highlighted in terms of her capabilities, turn meter failing, a little bit of healing, but more importantly, the increased attack and the weaken as far as debuffing goes. Honorable mention to Patrick as well as Claydna, because there are alternative ways of cleansing your team that, if you need to get rid of the debuffs. Emek, honorable mention to him as well, because you can protect your team effectively by being under a shield / being under unkillable, so you're not going to die while you do some tank and burn strategy. So if you don't want to have a super high resistance, super high accuracy Saoirse, then you can just run an Emek alongside of her, protect her, keep the team under unkillable, and then just again tank and burn. Neve can kind of do a similar thing, keeping your team alive, but she also does like healing, cleansing, or healing, block debuffs to prevent your team from getting the poisons. And when it comes to the epics, again, we talked about some of them in the summon pool, but doing the runic with his A3 with the counterattack, he can also be effectively a cleanser, but counterattacking constantly does add a lot of animation time, so it's not necessarily optimal in terms of time to do that, but it is a way to survive. We got Wearing on the Silken, who's a decent, reviver, single target, but arguably if you're worried about that, you'd be better off running the rare with the Void Rare, arguably, but the Void Rare Tree Shot not with his 2 revive, even though it's really weak in terms of the stats, but it's a little bit of shield to protect them, and then a little bit of healing as well on the A2. And then, of course, White Dryad Nia can do some stuff in terms of healing with their passive, single target heal, and the reset. So potentially you could run some sort of Nia Emek composition to kind of keep cycling through your abilities to stay permanently unkillable or something. So there's some options there, but again, I do think if you're fortunate enough to have spent enough money to have Saoirse, then she's perfect for this dungeon if you do want to run her unbooked. But unfortunately for me, don't have her yet. And out of curiosity, I think I'm getting close-ish. They were approaching 23,000 on my account. Let me know how far you are or how close you are in the comment section down below. But still over 2,000 points to go. So long. We're on the last stretch, of course, but still feels like it's many months away. But I honestly would like to get her on my account. But especially in this situation where it would have been perfect for this, it would have been nice to kind of just chill and run her alongside Crowd in stage 25 or something and just kind of chill there. But again, she does, after the buff she does have an affinity friendly HP burn, so she definitely can solo a bunch of different stages if you build her tanky enough. So yeah, that's going to do it for the free-to-play review of the summon pool, as well as some coverage of the Sylvan Watchers Only Spider Tournament. In my particular instance, I think my tournament was pretty high in terms of participation. I think there's some couple of people already well above 2,000, so probably they are Saoirse owners. That again makes it relatively easy to do. But be sure to check your group and see if it is active and see if people are participating, because if you don't have Saoirse, then it's just a little bit harder to do as far as making an efficient team that can get points at a high level. And if you do have a relatively dead group and you can put together a decent team that can run some low level of Spider, then you might be able to walk away with some relic fragments as well as some relentless gear, which can be pretty decent for boosting your capabilities on your account. Let me know in the comment section down below what your plan is relative to the summon pool as well as the Sylvan Watcher Spider Tournament. Are you participating in it? Because obviously if you're not going for the Titan event, then you probably don't really care. If you are going for the summon pool, then you might care, but it kind of depends if this feels worth it to go out there. But again, to me, I do think it is worth it if you can put together a team. It's only 1,400 points over the course of 2 days, and then you get a free shot at a pretty decent pool of legendaries overall, even though the most likely outcome, once again, is that you walk away with an epic from that free summon. But of course, you never know. You could always get lucky, and this could be the one summon or Prism Shard that results in being a legendary in this case. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It does help out the channel, and feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well, if and only if you're enjoying the content overall on the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.